"911, what is your emergency?"
They're killing her! The dogs! They're tearing her apart! In the hallway! Oh God, the blood, she's not moving! You have to hurry!
A locked door is supposed to be a barrier between our world and the dangers outside. It is the simple, silent contract we make with our homes. Here, we are safe. But what happens when the horror isn't outside? What happens when the danger is a few feet away, just beyond the door you share with your neighbors? What happens when a routine trip to the grocery store becomes a one-way journey into a nightmare? This is the story of a life so full of vitality and promise, extinguished in the most brutal way imagined. This is the story of Diane Whipple, a woman who had a future to fight for, a love to cherish, and a community that adored her. But in the cold, unyielding reality of a Pacific Heights hallway, she was reduced to a victim of unimaginable savagery, a victim of animals so monstrous and an apathy so profound it would stun a nation. This is a story about the monsters we create, the warnings we ignore, and the terrifying cost of neglect. Diane Whipple's world was one of motion, energy, and shared victory. At 33, she was a respected and beloved lacrosse coach at St. Mary's College of California. Her days were a whirlwind of practices, strategy sessions, and long talks with her players, who saw her not just as a coach, but as a mentor, a big sister. Diane had an infectious smile and a boundless optimism that drew people to her. She believed in hard work and kindness in equal measure. Friends described her as the kind of person who would push you to be your best and then celebrate your smallest success with genuine joy. On the field, she was a formidable competitor, and off the field, she was a source of unwavering support. She and her longtime partner, Sharon Smith, had built a life together that was both ordinary and extraordinary. They shared a cozy apartment in the Tony Pacific Heights neighborhood of San Francisco, a peaceful sanctuary where they cooked, watched movies, and simply existed together. Their love, a quiet, unbreakable bond. They had plans, dreams, a future they were building brick by brick. For them, this apartment building was more than a residence. It was the foundation of their life. But in the very same building, two other residents lived a life that was anything but ordinary. Robert Noel and Marjorie Knoller were attorneys, and their lives seemed to be a series of contradictions. They projected a certain professional confidence, but their personal lives were entangled in a bizarre and shadowy world. Their connection was to a high-ranking member of the Aryan Brotherhood, Paul Cornfed Schneider, who was serving a life sentence in Pelican Bay State Prison. Noel and Conler weren't just neighbors, they were the designated caretakers of the dogs they owned, a part of a wider, more disturbing scheme. They had adopted the two Presa Canarios, Bane and Hera, supposedly to breed them. The dogs were a link between the owners and Schneider, who, from behind bars, had a strange paternal-like interest in the dogs. It was a bizarre, codependent relationship, with the dogs as the central focus. In a way, they were a part of a criminal enterprise, a living, breathing component of a life far removed from the respectable world of law that Knoller and Knowles supposedly occupied. Their existence was a dark, twisted parallel to the bright, wholesome life Diane and Sharon had built. A powder keg waiting for a spark, and the match had been lit long ago. The animals at the heart of this tragedy were not common breeds. They were Presa Canarios, a breed that, by its very nature, demands respect and caution. Originally bred in the Canary Islands for guarding and herding cattle, they are immense in size and possess a powerful jaw. A male Presa Canario can easily stand over 2 feet at the shoulder and weigh more than 100 pounds. Their history is steeped in a working purpose. They were bred for strength, intimidation, and an unwavering loyalty to their master, which can quickly turn to extreme aggression toward outsiders. Experts in the breed universally agree that they require a firm, experienced hand and extensive socialization from a very young age. Without it, their natural protective instincts can become a liability, and their immense power makes them a deadly force. The two dogs at the center of this case, Bane and Hera, were far from properly socialized. Bane, the male, was the larger of the two, a hulking beast of a dog that weighed in at around 130 pounds. Heavily muscled and undeniably intimidating, he was the principal aggressor in the attack. Hera, the female, was also large and powerful, but less directly involved in the fatal mauling. These dogs were not treated like pets. They were not given the training or the social interaction necessary to curb their instinct. Instead, they were reportedly kept in a state of neglect, their powerful energy left to fester and turn to aggression. Their very names, Bane and Hera, seem to almost foreshadow their malevolent purpose, with Bane being a synonym for cause of great distress or annoyance, and Hera being a complex figure in Greek mythology, often associated with rage and jealousy. It was a macabre coincidence, or perhaps something more unsettling. The attack on Diane Whipple didn't come out of nowhere. It was the horrific climax of months, even years of ignored warnings. The tenants of the Pacific Heights apartment building lived in a state of quiet terror. Every time the elevator doors opened, a small knot of dread would form in their stomachs. Was Noller there with her two hulking beasts? Neighbors recounted countless near misses. One resident described being pinned against a wall in the narrow hallway while Bane lunged, teeth bared, only to be held back by Noller's tenuous grip. Another reported seeing the dogs being walked without leashes on more than one occasion, their sheer size making their presence a physical threat. A common complaint was the dogs' behavior in the elevator. They would bark and snarl ferociously, making a simple descent or ascent a terrifying ordeal for anyone who wasn't their owner. Multiple complaints were reportedly filed with the building management. Tenants pleaded for intervention, but their pleas fell on deaf ears, or at least deaf enough ears that no meaningful action was taken. When confronted, Robert Noel and Marjorie Noller were reportedly defiant and dismissive. They scoffed at the concerns, at one point allegedly telling a neighbor that her fear was irrational. This arrogant dismissal of very real danger would become a key piece of evidence in the trial. It wasn't just a case of negligent ownership. It was a case of deliberate indifference. The dogs were a known hazard, a ticking time bomb, and their owners not only knew it, but seemed to relish the intimidating power they wielded through their animals. They made no effort to muzzle the dogs or to give them the necessary training. In their hands, the Presa Canarios were more than pets. They were weapons. The final, fatal confrontation was not an accident. It was the terrible, inevitable outcome of a long-simmering pattern of reckless behavior. The building's hallways had become a gauntlet of fear, and on January 26, 2001, Diane Whipple walked right into it. It was a typical Friday afternoon. Diane Whipple was coming home from a grocery run. The bags of food in her arms were a symbol of a weekend to come, a shared meal with Sharon, a quiet night in. She rode the elevator to the 6th floor and stepped out into the familiar hallway. It was just another day, another moment in the rhythm of her life. But this ordinary moment was about to be shattered. As she approached her apartment door, she encountered her neighbor, Marjorie Noller. Noller was struggling to control her two massive dogs, Bane and Hera. Witnesses would later report that Noller was visibly strained, her hands wrapped around the leashes of the two powerful animals. The sheer force of the dogs, their desire to lunge, was palpable. The official account of the incident is a harrowing one. As Diane walked past, the dogs' leashes slipped from Noller's hands. It's unclear if they were dropped or if the dog's force was simply too much to contain. The next moments were a blur of chaos and violence. Bane, the male, a 130-pound behemoth, lunged.
There was no warning, no chance to react.
He attacked Diane, bringing her to the ground. The bags of groceries spilled, their contents scattering across the floor. Cans and cartons rolled in a frantic, panicked ballet. The sound of Diane's screams tore through the quiet hallway, but they were quickly drowned out by the ferocious barks and growls of the dogs. This was not a quick attack. It was a relentless, sustained mauling. Diane tried to fight back, to get up, but the dogs were too strong. Her inner monologue in those terrifying moments must have been a whirlwind of frantic terror and desperate hope. I have to get up. I have to fight. Sharon is in there. I have to get to the door. But the sheer weight and power of the dogs were overwhelming. Bane's jaws clamped down repeatedly, inflicting a torrent of wounds. The attack was so vicious that her clothes were ripped from her body. The only parts of her body that were not bitten were the top of her head and the soles of her feet. This wasn't just an attack, it was a savaging. Marjorie Knoller was reportedly on the scene, screaming and attempting to pull the dogs away, but her efforts were ineffectual. A neighbor, hearing the blood-curdling screams, peered through their peephole and was met with a scene of unimaginable horror. They immediately called 911, their voice choked with terror. But by the time help arrived, the damage was already done. The attack had left Diane in a state beyond saving. The silence that followed was heavy with a terrible finality. The 911 call from the neighbor was a chilling, desperate plea for help. "Please, they're killing her. The dogs, they're tearing her to pieces. Get here now." The raw panic in his voice spoke volumes. The dispatcher, in a testament to their training, remained calm, attempting to get more details, to pinpoint the location of the carnage. Within minutes, the sirens of police and fire department vehicles wailed through the streets of Pacific Heights, a jarring, dissonant sound in such a pristine neighborhood. Officers were the first on the scene, and what they found on the 6th floor was a scene straight out of a horror film. Blood was everywhere, splattered across the walls and pooling on the floor. Diane Whipple lay motionless. Her injuries were too numerous to count. One paramedic would later describe the scene as one of the most brutal they had ever witnessed. The dogs, Bane and Hera, were still present, their aggressive posturing making it difficult for the first responders to get to Diane. They had to be contained by officers before the paramedics could approach. The sight of the dogs, their muzzles stained with blood, was a grim indictment of their owners' neglect. Despite the best efforts of the paramedics, it was clear that Diane's life was hanging by a thread. The sheer number of her injuries, particularly the puncture to her trachea, meant she was barely able to breathe. She was quickly loaded onto a gurney and rushed to San Francisco General Hospital, her life fading with every siren wail. Tragically, she would not survive. Hours later, at 6:48 p.m., Diane Whipple was pronounced dead. The cause of death was officially listed as massive blood loss from over 77 bite wounds, along with asphyxiation from the tracheal damage. The sheer scale and brutality of the attack shocked even the most hardened law enforcement official. The death of Diane Whipple was not just a local news story. It became a national sensation. The sheer horror of the attack, combined with the bizarre and utterly remorseless behavior of Robert Noel and Marjorie Knoller, public outrage reached a fever pitch. In the days following the attack, a media circus descended upon the Pacific Heights apartment. Knoller and Noel's initial statements were defiant and callous. In a shocking letter to the district attorney, they blamed Diane Whipple for her own death, suggesting she might have been on steroids or wearing a special perfume. This shocking lack of empathy, this willingness to blame the victim, was an insult to a mourning city and an enraging revelation to the public. It painted a picture of a couple who felt they were above the law, above human decency. The public cried out for justice, for more than just a misdemeanor charge. The legal proceedings were as dramatic as Due to the intense media scrutiny in San Francisco, the trial was moved to Los Angeles. It was a courtroom drama unlike any other, with more than 30 witnesses, including neighbors and first responders, testifying to the dog's dangerous nature and the owner's repeated negligence. The prosecution argued that Noller and Noelle were not just negligent, they were criminally reckless. They knew the dogs were a threat, and by keeping them in a densely populated building without proper control, they were acting with a malicious disregard for human life. The defense, led by Noelle himself, put forth a convoluted and largely unconvincing argument, trying to paint a picture of an unavoidable accident. They continued to blame Whipple even as the evidence mounted against them. The jury was not swayed. In a groundbreaking verdict, they found Robert Noelle and Marjorie Noller guilty of involuntary. But in a move that sent shockwaves through the legal world, they also found Marjorie Noller guilty of second-degree murder. The jury agreed with the prosecution's argument that her actions showed a conscious disregard for human life. It was a landmark conviction, one of the first of its kind in the United States, that held a dog owner criminally responsible for their animal's actions to the point of a murder charge. Noelle was sentenced to 4 years in prison. Noller was sentenced to 15 years to life. Her murder conviction was initially overturned on appeal, but was later reinstated by the California Supreme Court, solidifying the legal precedent. The case didn't just change the legal landscape for animal attacks, it also had a profound impact on social justice. Diane's partner, Sharon Smith, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against Noelle and Noller. At the time, California law did not grant same-sex partners the legal standing to sue for wrongful death. Sharon's fight was not just for her and Diane, it was for the rights of all LGBTQ+ couples. She won the lawsuit, and her public and tireless advocacy helped to pass new laws in California that granted domestic partners legal rights and protections. The tragedy of Diane Whipple's death became a painful but powerful catalyst for change, forcing a reckoning with our laws and our responsibilities. The tragic story of Diane Whipple stands as a somber monument to the dangers of reckless indifference. Her death wasn't an unfortunate accident. It was a preventable horror, the inevitable conclusion to a long ignored series of warnings. It reminds us that our rights and freedoms come with an implicit responsibility to those around us. When we choose to own a creature of immense power, we bear the full weight of that power on our shoulders. But beyond the courtrooms and the laws, her story is a chilling reminder of how quickly the sanctuary of our daily lives can be violated. And that in the mundane corridors of our homes, the most dangerous monsters might not be the ones we fear, but the ones we allow.